"I'm not here to beg," the boy said, his small hands wrapped around a battered suitcase. "I'm here to claim what my mother left me." In the mirrored lobby of Hawthorne Global, every polished surface reflected the same contrast. Luxury towering over a child who looked like he'd walked through a storm. His name was Malik Rivers, 12 years old, and he carried only two things that mattered: a creased letter and an old photograph. Security moved in fast, but before they could drag him away, Grant Hawthorne, the company's iron-fisted CEO, stepped out of the elevator. One glance at Malik's worn clothes, and he scoffed. Another scam, another headline waiting to happen. Malik didn't flinch. He slid the letter forward, his voice shaking with anger and grief. It was written by Julian Hawthorne, Grant's late brother, the man Malik had never met, but whose face stared back from the photo beside Malik's mother, Nadia Rivers. The company's longtime attorney, Elliot Price, read the letter and went pale. There was a clause. If Julian had a child, that child would inherit a major stake in the empire. Grant tried to crush it with insults, but Malik's eyes, so unmistakably Julian's, made the room go quiet. Days later, the truth arrived in black and white. The DNA results confirmed Malik was Julian's son. Grant's pride cracked. He found Malik in a cheap motel, nearly out of money, and for the first time spoke softly. Malik didn't ask for revenge, only respect for the mother who worked herself into the ground to keep him alive. And when Grant finally opened the mansion doors, Malik stepped in, not just as an heir, but as proof that dignity can outlive poverty. The moment Malik's suitcase hit the marble floor with a dull thud, the lobby seemed to hold its breath, then exhale in laughter. Whispered judgments rippled through tailored suits like a cold draft. Who let him in? Another con artist. Two guards closed in, their hands already reaching for his arms, as if he were something that needed to be removed before it could stain the glass and gold. Grant Hawthorne didn't even try to hide his contempt. He looked Malik up and down, frayed cuffs, scuffed shoes, grief sitting heavy behind brave eyes, and his mouth curled into a smile that wasn't kind. "This isn't a shelter," he said, voice smooth as polished steel. "You don't walk into my company and demand a fortune because you found an old photo and a sob story." Malik felt heat rise in his throat, not from fear, but from humiliation, sharp, burning, familiar. It was the same feeling he'd swallowed on nights when his mother, Nadia Rivers, came home with her feet blistered and her smile exhausted, pretending everything was fine so he could keep believing tomorrow might be gentler. He remembered her hands shaking as she folded that letter and pressed it into his palm like it was the last piece of her heart. "If you ever have to use it," she'd whispered, "stand tall. Don't let them make you small." "Call the police," Grant snapped, turning slightly as if Malik had already stopped existing. "This is extortion. Get him out." The guards tightened their grip. Malik's chest tightened, but he refused to bow his head. He forced the letter higher, his small fingers trembling, not with weakness, but with the weight of everything he'd lost. "I'm not stealing," he said, voice cracking, then steadying. "I'm telling you the truth." For a split second, Grant's eyes flicked to Malik's face, just long enough for something uninvited to stir beneath his certainty. The resemblance was a ghost he didn't want to see. And across the lobby, Elliot Price's expression changed as if he'd just heard a door unlock somewhere deep in the past. Elliot Price didn't rush forward like the others. He moved the way a man does when he's afraid of what he might find. Slow, careful, as if the air itself could cut him. His eyes stayed on Malik's face. Not the torn backpack, not the battered suitcase, but the features that refused to be dismissed. The set of his jaw, the shape of his gaze, that startling familiarity that made time fold in on itself. And on, "Wait," Elliot said, and his voice wasn't loud, but it carried. The guards hesitated. Grant's head snapped toward him, irritation flashing. "Elliot, don't indulge this," Grant warned, like a king scolding a loyal servant for listening to a peasant's plea. But Elliot was already reaching for the letter Malik held out. Malik's fingers were trembling now, not from fear, but from the terrifying hope that someone, just one person, might finally see him. Elliot took the paper as if it were fragile glass. The room fell into a hush so sharp Malik could hear his own breathing. Elliot's eyes moved across the page, and with every line, his face drained of certainty. He swallowed once, hard. This isn't a random note," he murmured, almost to himself. Grant scoffed, stepping closer. "Anyone can forge a signature." Elliot lifted the page toward the light. "Not like this." His thumb brushed the bottom corner where a faint embossed seal lived, subtle, deliberate, the kind only an insider would know existed. Then he pulled out his phone, hands suddenly unsteady, and typed with the precision of someone defusing a bomb. Malik watched the screen glow in Elliot's palm, watched the man's brow knit tighter and tighter. When Elliot finally looked up, his voice had changed. It wasn't the calm of a corporate lawyer anymore. It was the strained honesty of a witness. "Mr. Hawthorne," he said, "this letter matches the secure identification code we used for Julian's private legal documents. It's in the system. It's authentic." Grant's mouth opened, then closed. For the first time, he didn't have an insult ready, only a flicker of something like fear. Elliot turned slightly, addressing the room but anchoring his gaze on Grant. "And there's more," he continued. "Julian's will contains a contingency clause. If he ever had a child, any biological heir, that child is entitled to inherit a significant share of Hawthorne Global." He paused, as if even the number tasted dangerous. 40%. A stunned silence slammed into the lobby. Malik's stomach dropped, not because of the money, but because the truth suddenly felt too big to hold. 40% wasn't just a fortune. It was a seat at the table that had spent 12 years pretending he didn't exist. Grant's eyes burned into Malik, like he could erase him by sheer force of will. Malik stood his ground, his voice small but steady, carrying every exhausted night of Nadia's sacrifice. "I didn't come to take your world," he said. "I came because my mother died with this in her hands, and I'm all she left behind." The lobby's silence didn't last. It shattered into frantic phone calls, hurried whispers, and the cold, practiced smile Grant Hawthorne wore when he wanted control back. Within minutes, Malik Rivers was escorted outside, not dragged, not arrested, but still dismissed, as if the marble floors had rejected him the way the world always had. Rain met him at the revolving doors like an old enemy. He walked until his legs ached, until the city lights blurred into water, then pushed open the door of a cheap motel that smelled of bleach and old cigarettes. Inside, Malik emptied his pockets onto the bedspread. A few crumpled bills, loose change, a bus ticket folded too many times. It wasn't enough for many nights. He stared at the letter again, thumb tracing his mother's name, Nadia Rivers, like he could bring her back by remembering the exact shape of her sacrifice. Stand tall, she'd told him. But standing tall didn't stop hunger, didn't stop loneliness, didn't stop the fear that tomorrow would slam the door just like today. Back at Hawthorne Global, Grant paced his office like a man trapped in his own shadow. Elliot Price's words kept looping through his mind. Authentic 40% Julian's child. But it was Malik's eyes that haunted him most. Those eyes weren't pleading, they were accusing without saying a word. Grant tried to drown it in logic. "Set up the DNA test," he finally snapped, as if barking orders could silence his conscience. "If he's lying, I want proof. If he's telling the truth." His voice faltered, and the sentence died there. 2 days later, in a sterile clinic with humming lights, Malik sat rigid in a plastic chair while a nurse swabbed the inside of his cheek. Grant watched from across the room, arms folded tight, jaw clenched so hard it looked painful. Malik refused to shrink under that stare. My mom didn't raise a thief, he said quietly. She raised a survivor. When the results arrived, they came in a plain envelope. No drama, no headlines, just paper that could break an empire. Grant tore it open with fingers that suddenly felt too large, too clumsy. His eyes locked onto the number and didn't move. Probability of paternity, 99.9%. For a long moment, he didn't breathe. Pride tried to rise, angry, defensive, but something heavier drowned it. The truth that a child had been living in the margins of their wealth, and Julian's blood had been sleeping in a motel bed with an empty stomach. Grant looked up at Elliot, and for the first time his voice was stripped bare. "Find him," he said, "now." Grant Hawthorne found Malik Rivers the way you find someone the world has been trained to overlook, by following the places where hope gets cheap. The motel manager pointed down a dim corridor, and Grant walked it with a stiffness that wasn't power anymore, but shame. When he knocked, the sound was too soft for a man who owned half the city. Malik opened the door an inch, chains still latched, eyes narrowing with the reflex of a kid who has learned that kindness often comes with a hook. "You again?" Malik said, voice flat. Grant held up the envelope, the DNA report trembling between his fingers like a confession. "You were telling the truth," he managed. The words tasted strange, as if his mouth had never been built for humility. Malik didn't smile. He didn't celebrate. He just stared at that paper, then passed it like he could see his mother's last breath floating somewhere behind Grant's expensive suit. "I didn't want your apology," Malik whispered. "I wanted you to stop calling my mom a liar." Grant's throat tightened. "Nadia Rivers," he began, and Malik's eyes flashed, raw, wounded, protective. Grant swallowed and corrected himself. "Your mother, she deserved better than what we assumed." The chain clicked free. Malik stepped back, letting Grant into a room barely big enough for regret. On the nightstand sat Malik's only treasures, the letter, the photograph, and a worn hoodie folded like it mattered. Grant's gaze caught on Malik's wrist as the boy reached for the report, then froze. There, just below the sleeve line, was a faint crescent-shaped birthmark, pale against deep skin, curved like a sliver of moon. Grant's breath hitched. His own brother, Julian, had carried the same mark hidden beneath a watch for years, joking that the Hawthorne men were branded by the sky. Grant had mocked it once. Now it felt like a seal pressed across generations. "Show me," Grant said softly, and Malik stiffened, suspicion flaring. "No Malik," snapped Malik. "I'm not a specimen." "You're not," Grant replied, voice breaking around the truth. "Your family." Malik's jaw trembled as he pulled back his sleeve anyway, defiant, furious, grieving, and the crescent gleamed under the flickering light. Grant didn't touch it. He didn't need to. The empire, the contracts, the boardroom threats, none of it mattered against that quiet, undeniable proof. Grant sank onto the edge of the bed, shoulders suddenly older than his fortune. "I can't undo what you've lived through," he said, "but I can change what happens next." He looked up, and for the first time his eyes didn't measure Malik as risk or scandal, only as a boy who should never have been alone. "Come with me, not to the company, to home." Malik's voice cracked. "Home died with my mom." Grant nodded, and the nod was a vow. "Then we'll build you a new one," he said. "And I swear to you, starting tonight, you won't be alone again." The next morning, the mansion felt too quiet until the outside world came crashing in. Headlines exploded across screens like fireworks made of cruelty. "Motel boy claims millions," "Dead woman's long con," "Gold digger's secret son." By noon, cameras had gathered at the front gates, hungry for a story they could chew into something ugly and simple. Grant Hawthorne's PR team begged for silence, for strategy, for statements written by lawyers. Malik Rivers listened from the top of the staircase, his stomach turning as strangers dissected his mother's name like it was gossip, not a life. Nadia Rivers,
a woman who had held him together with blistered hands and quiet prayers, a woman who had died tired. When Grant finally walked him into the conference room, bright lights, microphones, rows of polished faces, Malik's knees wanted to buckle. He smelled cologne and expensive impatience. He felt every eye trying to decide whether he was a victim or a threat. Grant sat beside him, jaw tense, ready to shield the family brand. But Malik wasn't there for the brand. A reporter's voice cut through the room. "Was your mother paid to trap Julian Hawthorne? Did she plan this?" Malik's hands curled into fists beneath the table. For a second, he saw his mother in the dim kitchen of their apartment, counting coins at midnight, whispering, "We'll be okay." He leaned forward, and when he spoke, his voice didn't shake the way his body did. "My mother worked 3 jobs," he said, each word landing like a stone. "Morning shift at a diner, cleaning offices at night, weekends doing laundry for people who never learned her name." The room stilled. She didn't trap anyone. She didn't even use the letter when she was alive. She kept it folded for 12 years like it was a last resort because she believed pride was cheaper than begging. Someone scoffed. Malik's eyes burned. "You want a headline? Here's one. She died exhausted. Not rich, not famous, exhausted."
And I carried her hospital bracelet in my pocket because I didn't have anything else to hold on to. He lifted the worn photograph, his thumb brushing the edge where his mother's smile lived. "So don't you dare call her a gold digger. She never dug for gold. She dug for my future." Silence swallowed the room. Malik felt his throat tighten. But he kept going, softer now, sharper in a different way. "I didn't come here to be your scandal. I came here because she's gone, and the truth is all I have left." Grant's chair scraped back. He stood slowly, deliberately, then placed a steady hand on Malik's shoulder. His voice, when it came, was stripped of arrogance. "We were wrong," he said to the cameras, "and we will not let Nadia Rivers be dragged through the dirt to protect our comfort." Malik didn't look at Grant. Not yet. But for the first time, as the flashbulbs popped like thunder, he felt something shift, like the world had finally been forced to listen. That night, when the cameras finally drifted away and the mansion settled back into its expensive silence, Grant Hawthorne stood alone in his study, with the DNA report in one hand and Malik's words echoing in his skull like a verdict. He stared at the city through the window glass between him and the world and realized he'd been living behind the same kind of barrier for years, wealth thick enough to muffle other people's pain. On the desk sat an old framed photo of Julian smiling in a way Grant had always dismissed as soft. Now that softness felt like the only thing in the room that wasn't lying. A soft knock broke the stillness. Malik hovered at the doorway, not timid, just careful, like someone who'd learned that welcome can turn into leave without warning. Grant didn't tell him to come in. He didn't know if he deserved that kind of authority anymore. "I didn't say those things for you," Malik murmured. "I said them for her." Grant's throat tightened. He nodded once, slow. "I know," he said. And then, for the first time in his life, he let the sentence finish without armor. "And I'm sorry." The words landed awkwardly, unpracticed, but real. "I looked at you and saw a problem, a threat, a headline. I didn't see a boy carrying his mother's last breath in his hands." He swallowed hard. "I called her names because it was easier than admitting my brother could love someone outside our world and that I could be wrong." Malik's eyes narrowed, hurt, fighting with disbelief. "Sorry doesn't bring her back." "No," Grant admitted, and his voice cracked on the truth. "But it can change what happens next." He set the report down like a weapon he refused to use. "I spent my life believing money was proof of worth, that if you didn't have it, you must have failed. That's what I told myself, so I wouldn't have to look at people like your mother and feel anything at all." For a long moment, Malik didn't move. Then his shoulders lowered a fraction, just enough to show how heavy he'd been holding himself. Grant took a breath as if stepping off a cliff. "I can't erase the way I treated you," he said, "but I can face it. I can tell the board, I can tell the world, and if anyone tries to shame you again, if anyone tries to bury Nadia Rivers under their cruelty, I will stand in front of it." Malik's voice came out quiet, raw.
"Why?" Grant's eyes didn't flinch this time. "Because you're here," he said, "and because I finally understand something Julian seemed to know all along. Dignity isn't earned by a bank account. It's something you're born with, and I forgot that until you walked into my lobby and refused to kneel." Years passed, and the Hawthorne name stopped meaning only glass towers and locked gates. It began to mean something softer, something earned. On the day the Nadia Rivers Foundation opened its doors, Malik Rivers stood on a small stage in a community center that smelled of coffee, worn books, and second chances. Grant Hawthorne sat in the front row, no cameras, no board members, just a man learning how to listen. Malik looked out at the crowd, single mothers clutching paperwork, fathers with calloused hands, teenagers pretending they weren't scared. He remembered the motel room, the crumpled bills, his mother's tired smile that still somehow made him feel safe. He took a breath, and his voice carried the weight of a promise. "My mother didn't leave me money," he said. "She left me a reason." He gestured to the tables behind him. Applications for rent relief, job training, emergency childcare, scholarship forms. This is what she deserved when she was alive. So if we can't give it to her, we'll give it to the next Nadia, the next kid who thinks hunger is normal, the next family one paycheck away from losing everything. Grant rose quietly and placed a hand over his heart, not for applause, almost like a vow renewed. Malik's gaze met his, and for the first time, it wasn't anger that tied them together, but purpose. The Empire hadn't saved Malik, truth did. And now Malik was turning inheritance into something greater than power, a bridge built from pain leading others toward light. Sometimes the most valuable thing isn't what we receive, but what we choose to turn our pain into. Malik didn't use the truth for revenge. He used it to restore his mother's dignity and to clear a path for others like him. In real life, you can't control where you start, but you can always control how you rise and who you choose to lift up along the way. If this story resonated with you, leave a comment sharing one lesson you took from it or a moment when you stood tall like Malik. And if you'd like to see more stories that are moving, dramatic, and thought-provoking like this one, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you won't miss the next episode.